Hey, welcome to the Virtually Speaking podcast. As you know, my name is Pete Flecha. John is out gallivanting around the world right now, speaking to customers and partners. But we are continuing this conversation around VCF Advanced Services. We've been going through them relentlessly. It's been a blast. And the really cool thing for me is some of them I know a lot about, and I'm just, having the conversation with folks. But this is one where I'm not so familiar with, and I'm actually excited to learn more about. It's called ValueOps. It's part of Broadcom's offerings, and it's now an advanced service for VMware Cloud Foundation, which is why we're going to be covering it today. And thankfully, I am not alone. I've got a few experts that are going to join this conversation and let me and hopefully you know all you need to know about ValueOps. So joining the conversation first is Lisa Marie, Direct Executive Solutions for ValueOps. Lisa Marie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pete.
And Lisa Marie, you are not alone. We are also joined by Head of Product for Clarity by Broadcom, Brian. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Pete. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, as I mentioned, like you guys know this product great, which is why you're here. And I do not. And I'm very curious to know, we can dive deeper as we go, but why don't we start at the highest level possible? Like what exactly is ValueOps and what problem does it solve?
Sure. So I'll take it first, then Lisa Marie can certainly jump in. So ValueOps, the name implies ops, right? So like you have DevOps, right? ValueOps was intended to expand the concept to say, okay, well, yeah, you can make things go faster. You can improve the efficiency of development. But if you don't know what business value it delivers, what's the point, right? I can manufacture widgets as fast as possible, but if those widgets are useless when they come off the machine, then so who cares, right? So the concept of ValueOps is to tie all of that downstream stuff that's happening to the business, to the investments that the organization wants to make and why they're making them, and then give clear line of sight, what we call the golden or steel thread, all the way between what the organization intended, what the strategy is and what the organization is intending from its investment, all the way down through the chain to the actual code being deployed, running in production, monitored, and so forth, right? And so that's really what ValueOps is in a nutshell, is to extend that concept. And that's why the term is what it is, but it basically includes all of the things we'll talk about today.
Yeah, and I've heard it referred to. I did a little homework on this, and I noticed some of the slides I saw was referring to this journey, if you will. And so, how do you guys describe this journey using this train metaphor?
Right. So we're going to talk today. We're going to talk about the part of ValueOps that handles infrastructure portfolio, so infrastructure portfolio management. And we use the train metaphor because we kind of like to say, look, you guys and VCF is fantastic for laying the foundation. The foundation's in the term, right? VCF. And the idea is that, so we like to think of that as the tracks, right? So they're these beautiful tracks for these high speed rail. But the trouble is that if you lay the tracks, lay the foundation, but you don't have any really great trains running on them, when they don't know where they're going and they don't know what they're doing, then again, it's not really going to deliver anything, right? So what we like to say is we like to say that you lay the foundation, and then you need to have the right things running on that foundation. The high-speed train that allows you to make the right decisions, get you where you want to go as fast as possible, and is going to take advantage of all of those neat things that are involved in the foundation so that we can actually deliver more value for the business. And I think that that's really where we're going on that metaphor, is the idea that the foundation needs to be there because you can't have the train without the tracks, and the tracks need to support it. But the idea is that you need both. You need both that foundation as well as the thing running on top of it to actually get the value you're hoping for out of everything.
Yeah, and I think I would add, Brian, I think that's great. I love that idea that there's a track, but if nothing's going on it, you're not going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. But I think ValueOps, what it does is it sort of crystallizes for people what your strategic plans are. It helps you avoid risk. It provides predictable plans through forecasting and costs. And so there's a lot of goodness, which it differentiates from the foundation. So it's almost, elevating all of the things that make decision support really easy.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
like that. Yeah, and I know one of the we actually just recently had a really interesting discussion with one of our an analyst around AI and this push for AI. There's obviously a massive push for AI for a lot of organizations, but it's as Dave Lithicum was mentioning on our podcast. He was saying how a lot of organizations, there's a huge percentage of organizations that they're trying to get AI moving in their environments, and it's one thing to play with some LLMs and to figure something out, but it's another thing to get something working in production and to actually have a successful implementation of AI in their organizations. Do you see this as as something that could possibly help that?
Yes, and I think part of the reason I think that is simply because if you look at what the reasons are for some of the challenges people have had in productizing or putting into production some of these experiments they've run, right? And the some studies have said it's as low as 5%, like that only 1 in 20 of these things ever actually make it into production. A large part of it is that organizations have never really taken the time to catalog or really understand what's in their infrastructure, right? I was talking to a PMO director because I've primarily dealt with PMO folks, and we were talking about their projects and programs, and that was all wonderful. And then I said, okay, and then he mentioned casually like they had some like operational stuff, back office applications and servers and everything else. And I said, yeah, okay, so what about those things? And they were like, oh yeah, that they're there, and we don't get a lot of questions about it. And I said, is it a significant amount of your spend? Oh yeah, probably like 2/3, 3/4 of our spend, but no, just didn't care. And I think that that's really the challenge culturally in a lot of organizations, is that infrastructure was always just kind of seen as a cost, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we know we have to keep the lights on, we have to have the stuff, we'll have some additional capacity because we know we'll need it, right? But and then what they do is they say, okay, and it'll be plus or minus X%, because one of the challenges, right, is that the only an assistant to a CEO I was talking to said, yeah, the only discretionary line we really have in our income statement, is technology spend, right? Almost everything else is dictated from some outside source, right? Customers dictate our revenue. This is the only thing I actually can control, is this line. And so the idea is that, it was always seen as, okay, so it's plus minus 10%. We'll use that to but now it's strategic, right? If you're going to do AI, okay, well, if I don't have the compute to actually be able to do the AI, well, then guess what? It doesn't matter what I want to do. And so the idea, and furthermore, in addition to that, right? And if there's no relationship understanding of what the infrastructure powers or controls, then it's just a mess, right? Because now you get into things like, well, where's the data coming from? Is the data coming from a secured system? Is that going to mean that we can feed it into the engine, right? So those are all the types of things that we can deal with in that regard.
What I think is interesting is that they talk about infrastructure leaders as the custodians of stability. And now infrastructure leaders are expected to be the architects of competitive advantage. So how do they get there? Infrastructure organizations, tend to be, very solid organizations with many of the same people, with many of the same skills. And now they're being challenged to evolve because of AI. And one of the things that Brian was just talking about is we have the ability to bring in all of those pieces of data. The data really slows them down because they have all different tools. There might be spreadsheets. You've got the CMDB, which is only about 70% accurate. And so this is actually the ValueOps platform and Clarity specifically. What we can do is bring all of that data in, and we'll talk about, governing predictably. We're actually able to clean the data, look for anomalies in the data, look for inconsistencies in the data. So if, for example, if in the CMDB, you always have duplicates of many things, or if there's a manager that has left and is no longer assigned to an application owner. This is all the kinds of metadata that we have in the system that we can start to actually generate information that allows them to move quickly, that allows these leaders to get in a room and look at what are the business strategies, the things that come out of the boardroom, and associate those to what applications are we going to bring to market? What are our goals? And then let's look at the infrastructure and what we have to do with the infrastructure. And I like this view because it's the 6 R's or the 5 R's, depending who you are and how you reference it. But it really starts to give you good information for operational decision making.
Oh, yeah. And for those that are just listening to this podcast, pause and jump over to the YouTube and check out the video, because I'm looking at some pretty cool stuff right here. This is a screen capture of Clarity. And man, this is fancy. This looks like a lot. Honestly, I feel like we could probably do a 10-hour class just on how to manage this. This looks amazing. It looks like there's a lot of information in here. So that is pretty exciting. But is this what people would refer to as FinOps, or is it more than that?
So it's more than that, because the challenge with FinOps is that FinOps is almost always rear view looking, right? So it's like you get the bill, and so now I can look at the bill and see where the money was spent, right? And that's nice and it's helpful. In other words, it kind of gives you an idea of what happened, but it doesn't really do anything for you about, okay, well, now what? Like, what are we going to do next, right? And so that's part of this whole idea, is that you can take your FinOps information, that can be a source for this, right? And now load it into investment management to say, okay, so now we can see that we didn't hit our cloud commit, or we spent, we spent in infrastructure, or we used infrastructure on something that, well, we're not doing that anymore. That particular business is going away, or we're going to shut it down or whatever. So now let's divert those resources more efficiently now. In other words, why wait until the next quarterly review, or why wait until the end of the annual operating plan, right? Let's actually do something with that, especially if, as we just talked about previously, right, AI is becoming the big thing and it's accelerating everything we're doing. Then we need to be able to make these decisions sooner. We need to be able to be more efficient with the resources and compute we have, right? And to Lisa Marie's point from before, right, by bringing all of that information together into one place, it allows us the opportunity to understand, okay, well, these things are all related to each other, so it impacts us a certain way. And so we can now make those decisions proactively, so that we can do things like, oh, well, we should migrate from the public cloud to VCF, for example, because here's the benefits that we're going to get from that. And here are the applications that will be affected because they're the ones that are running in there right now. And we should time it this way because the contracts expire in this time frame. And we have licensing agreements that we need to deal with, right? It allows you to get all of that into one place so you can really understand the full picture of what's happening in terms of the organization's technology investment and how it impacts the business.
Now, I was going to add that, I just only came with a couple of views here, but we're able to do application rationalization. We're able to associate, if you're going to make a big platform change, well, I guess we should look at all the applications and the licensing and the contracts to see when those become expired. Do we move those things? How do we make these decisions? So all of that data is here. There are several views that we can share, but it really starts to level up and create this intelligence layer so that now infrastructure can move more quickly.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you need to actually get decisions made more quickly. Not that this is a parallel, but it just reminded me of like my daughter, for example. She graduated college, and obviously we had to pay for all that, and then she started working, and she determined she wanted to continue education and stop working. So she put together a presentation for me on all the reasons on why this was going to be beneficial for me to continue paying for her college and support her. And she organized this entire thing to actually explain why this was going to be the most valuable investment of my resources, and helped me make that decision, and certainly expedited the decision-making process because it was all there. Obviously, that's a very small example, but I would imagine that looking at what I'm looking at on the screen here, if I was to try to make these decisions with leadership teams, having this level of historical information, understanding exactly what it would cost, but also seeing all the factors. This has to be a way to actually expedite the decision-making process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the, I think there was a study where it takes, the average decision in a technology infrastructure environment takes up to 2.5 months, right? 10 weeks. And I think we all know why. It's because there's Bob, who has a spreadsheet, who actually knows where everything
Mhm.
is. And in order to actually make the decision, we mine the spreadsheet, right? Literally data mining. Like we go into the spreadsheet to try to find the right information to help us understand what the heck's going on. And that's the issue, right? The issue is that we don't want people to have to be miners or have to go looking for this stuff. We want to actually just be able to present it and say, here's the information that you need in order to be able to make this decision, so that you don't have to take weeks just to find the right details, which, by the way, tend to be outdated as soon as you get them, right? As soon
Yeah.
as you've gotten the information, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, now the meeting happens 3 weeks later and it's all old. So now so we're trying to make decisions at the speed of AI or the future, whatever you want to call it. The idea is that let's actually get the decision-making process to be aligned with what we've always heard about DevOps, right? Which is that DevOps is all about efficiency and reducing the friction from getting the stuff out and deployed, and reduce the amount of time it takes to trap issues that are in production and be able to actually resolve them, right? Well, now let's talk about the upfront process. Why does it take us so long to make a decision, right? That's part of, because if we're really looking at the elapsed time from when we have an idea to when we get to realize the value because it's in front of the customer, then it doesn't matter whether it's upfront, how long it took us to make the decision, or whether it's in the deployment. That whole time matters, right? And so the idea is that we want to get time to market down. Part of that is the decision-making process.
Yeah, and I just want to add, just if I bring in this next bit of eye candy, just to pivot back a little bit to FinOps, you'll see in the middle or the bottom grid, what's interesting about the application is that it has, different ways that people work, whether they work, we talked about in spreadsheets, or you've got these wonderful widgets that you can just click and drill into the data, different views, but there is full financial capability here. So another difference between FinOps is they might just take, a total number of something and put it in the P&L. But what's happening here is that we're actually forecasting, and whether it's, we have the rates of, storage rates or networking and so on, we're actually able to calculate and forecast the spend over a time period. And you could do that whether it's monthly or quarterly or annually. And so just imagine how this would help in AOP planning, your budget planning cycle, how it would help if you were starting to think about doing some sort of operational decision like a migration. And there's, what if capabilities here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Not only do you have the predictability in the forecasting that you're looking at and the predictable costs, because we're going to take that information, by the way, from VCF operations, and we're going to look at the consumption, and we're going to look at, all of the calculations that are done in there. We're going to take that into the system, and then that's where you're going to see anomalies. So if consumption is down or usage is down, you might compare that against your costs. You might get a hockey stick effect, you might not. So this gives, the ability to infrastructure leaders to look at, the trend of public cloud costs versus moving to a private cloud. There's a lot that we can do here with what ifing. So it's a lot richer. It ties right into FinOps and the treatment of labor and non-labor, but it ties right into looking at things in a granular way over time, again, associated back to the boardroom strategy to see, are we doing the right things and are we spending the money in the right way?
There you go. Yeah. So if your daughter wants to use this to convince you to go for a PhD, Pete, then we can make it available to her.
Yeah. Oh, hopefully she's not listening. Okay. Awesome. Well, we started this thing talking about, this journey and this conversation about VMware Cloud Foundation being the foundation, and this being a train. That being said, what do people need to do to actually get on this train and to actually make it high speed? Like, what would you recommend for folks to actually understand this and actually make this useful for what their needs are?
Sure. I think the key term I would start with is visibility, right? You have to be able to see everything in order to actually be able to act on it. So one of the challenges that organizations need to come to terms with is getting the information out from their silos and out from their individual systems and get it centralized into one place. Now, one of the questions you might ask, right, Pete, is okay, but we've had data lakes, we've had data, right? What's the difference there? And what we've noticed and what we've found in talking to customers is that the problem with the data lake is that it wasn't purposeful. In other words, it was kind of this idea that, oh, let's bring all the data together and then people will just know what to do with it if we just get it all together, pull it all together, right? And it's like, well, not necessarily, especially because they may not know where to find it in there and it wasn't necessarily tagged a certain way. And it's like, okay, so great. So instead, what you want to do is look, we're not just trying to get all the data. I don't need everything. What I need is the specific data that you think is important when making infrastructure decisions, right? If you get all that data together into one place and understanding what's in the infrastructure, what it powers, what applications might be using it because those add business value, right? What services they provide, what capabilities they enable, all those types of things. If we can get that all into one location, then that allows us the opportunity to start getting the train going down the tracks, and we can accelerate it because we can start to see, look, here's visibility into what that's all means and what decisions you can make and what options you have. And that's where the real bang for your buck comes from here, right? Is the idea that we can then accelerate things because we can actually take the actions that you couldn't take before because the data was all siloed and separated it out. And nobody, unless you had the right person in the right room at the right time who just happened to hear something and said, oh, we could do something with that. It's all serendipity at that point. It's like, okay, we just got lucky. And so the idea is that we don't want to just have everything be based on luck. We want to actually have it be a process that's going to be sustainable and allow us the opportunity to take advantage of all the great technology that's available to us.
I love this. Lisa Marie, I'm going to give you the last word.
Oh, good. I have just a few. So what we've been talking about today is infrastructure portfolio management. And I think we've heard a lot about the goodness of that and how it can really help our customers. If people want to know more, we are going to do a session soon on FinOps for the private cloud. And so we'll show more of the product and we'll get deeper into that conversation. And then, of course, IPM is part of strategic portfolio management. It's investment management. And behind me on my background, we are going to have a summit. It's our 6th year to do the ValueOps Summit. And it is on SPM for AI. And that is going to be on April 29th. So we hope that people will visit our page to register and attend the summit.
Absolutely. And
thanks so much, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely leave links in the show notes of this podcast to all of these resources and all of this information. This has been really informative. As I mentioned, folks, if you're listening or jump over to the YouTube to see the visuals, they're definitely worth your time. Any questions, leave them in the comments. Follow us on VMware Cloud Foundation's YouTube channel for the entire Advanced Services series. But this has been super great. Lisa Marie, Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.